Oké. We zullen beginnen. Dank iedereen voor het komen naar deze webinar voor SailPoint. De eerste van 3 series, Silverfort, sorry. De eerste van 3 series waar we mee gaan beginnen. We zullen eventjes, als er vragen zijn, moet ik zeggen, dan kun je die aangeven in de chat. In de tussentijd, we kunnen ze altijd even beantwoorden als je wil. En ik zou zeggen, Jerome, sorry, I should change in English because Jerome can listen in what we said in Dutch, but he can't speak. So, Jerome, let's start this webinar.
Oké, Jerome gaat straks de demo doen. Ik ga de presentatie doen. Mijn naam is Uitbreiding, ik ben Sales Manager Benelux bij Silverfort. Bedankt iedereen om aanwezig te zijn. Zoals Frits zei, als er vragen zijn, die kunnen via de questions tab gesteld worden. Dat gezegd zijn, vandaag gaan we spreken, de eerste van een serie van 3 webinars. Vandaag gaan we spreken over het uitbreiden van MFA naar alle systemen. Laat mij beginnen met misschien een situatie schetsen waarom dit belangrijk is. Identitybescherming is vandaag de dag, dat kunnen we zien uit veel industrieonderzoek, dat identity toch wel een topprioriteit is voor heel veel bedrijven. Toch merken we dat identity-based aanvallen blijven stijgen en blijft identity de nummer 1 factor voor de breaches die we zien. Dat is een tegenstelling, want waarom zien we meer en meer aanvallen op identity als we meer en meer geld aan het spenderen zijn aan identity? Kijk, dat is een beetje waar wij het antwoord op zoeken. Waarom zou je MFA gaan uitbreiden? Je hebt hier enkele redenen. Wat zien we vandaag? Hier zien we die paar belangrijke redenen. Huidige MFA-oplossingen richten zich veelal op applicaties die makkelijk te integreren zijn, zoals cloud-applicaties. En die bieden weinig of geen bescherming zodra dat er effectief een netwerkbreach gebeurd is. Dit omdat ze niet het gehele netwerk afdekken. Waar moet je hier aan denken? Denk bijvoorbeeld aan het ontbreken van MFA bij inloggen van PowerShell of fileshares. Dat brengt mij ook, als je ziet hier onder andere ook staan, cyberverzekering compliance. Wat we vandaag zien is dat heel veel verzekeraars niet meer genoegen nemen met het antwoord of met de vraag, heeft u MFA, ja of nee? Er wordt specifiek gevraagd naar welke onderdelen binnen het netwerk waar MFA ook van toepassing op is. Een van die vragen die wij onlangs nog gezien hebben bij enkele klanten is bijvoorbeeld, heeft u MFA op een PowerShell toepassing? Even kijken, de slide zal verder moeten gaan. Dus wat zijn de beperkingen van de huidige MFA? Dit is eigenlijk hoe dat visueel wordt weergegeven. We zien SaaS-applicaties, we zien webapplicaties die on-prem of in de cloud staan. Die kunnen redelijk makkelijk beveiligd worden, mits er een integraties met je huidige IAM-vendor. Zij dat dan Azure Active Directory, dat kan Okta zijn, dat kan Ping zijn. Dat zijn verschillende oplossingen. Alleen wordt hier een vitaal deel van uw netwerk, het deel dat vaakst misbruikt wordt bij breaches, vaak vergeten. Denk dan, zoals ik zei, over de remote tools, maar denk bijvoorbeeld ook aan fileshares. Denk bij verschillende organisaties aan OT-toegang. Denk aan, in de medische wereld zien we heel vaak nog medische apparatuur waar zelfs nog Windows XP op staat, waar die organisaties gewoon niet aan kunnen, omdat zij zelf geen upgrades kunnen doorvoeren op die apparatuur, maar die staan wel in het netwerk. Dus dat is al een vraagstuk waarom we die MFA moeten gaan uitbreiden. Nu, hoe kunnen we dat doen? Als we kijken naar de infrastructuur zoals die vandaag eruit ziet, zien we heel vaak, ofwel gaat een client via een agent naar zijn MFA-infrastructuur, of gaan we via een proxy naar een MFA-infrastructuur. Nu, dat is een aanpak die niet heel schaalbaar is om naar andere delen van het netwerk security controls te gaan toepassen. En zo zien we dus dat er heel veel delen van het netwerk alsnog, zoals daarnet beschreven, niet MFA, of waar MFA niet beschikbaar is. Nu, om toe te lichten hoe wij dit gaan doen, geef ik graag het woord aan mijn collega Jerome. Jerome is onze channel lead voor EMEA en gaat jullie uitleggen hoe Silverfort dit probleem aanpakt. Jerome, up to you.
Thank you very much. Let me switch screens here. All right. Good. So yeah, the next part is going to be in English, I'm afraid. My Dutch isn't so good, so I'm sure your English is way better than my Dutch. So how does this thing work? How do we actually protect all of those identities with MFA without having to install an agent? So the first thing that you will have to know that every time a user wants to access some kind of resource, no matter whether that's a file share or a database or an RDP session, whatever it is, there is going to be an authentication request sent to the IDP, for example, your Active Directory. That happens every single time. It doesn't just happen when I log in the morning. It happens, for example, when I click on a simple file share. So since every single authentication request goes to the AD, that's exactly where Silverfort sits. Silverfort is at the core of your Active Directory, seeing all those authentications happen, and then having the ability to hold those authentication requests and then react correspondingly. So we will apply our policy, which might say, oh, this is Jerome clicking on a file share, he's in the network, we'll just let it pass. Or this is Jerome's admin account trying to access a resource. Well, for that, he needs to MFA. And what we're going to do in that case, we're going to pass on that authentication request to the MFA infrastructure, which can be Microsoft, Okta, which can be RSA, Duo, whatever you have. And if there's nothing, it can even be Silverfort itself answering with an MFA response. And then this goes back to Silverfort. Silverfort will see what the answer was from the MFA and will then pass on that authentication request and allow access or just deny access. Now, this is the most simple of use cases for users, but there's more. Since we see all those authentications come in, we can then apply intelligence to that as well. We can see, for example, if there has been a brute force attack to an account. So we can dynamically and in real time look at 45 different risk factors and apply a risk scoring to an identity. And then we can actually base policy on that risk scoring, which means that we could say, well, in general, when Jerome clicks on his file share, he doesn't have to have MFA. However, since over the last night we have seen a brute force attack on his account, now when he clicks on his file share, he will have to MFA and make sure that he is actually who he pretends to be. So there is a dynamic policy that we can put in place as well in a very, very simple way. Now, what are the advantages of this type of solution? First of all, we don't need any agent, we don't need any proxy. It's completely non-intrusive because we just sit at the core of the Active Directory and we see all those authentications from there. We don't need to have anything on endpoints or on servers, or there's no scripting needed. We are not depending on any specific protocols. We really look at authentications. The next thing is that, well, for the end user, the experience is exactly the same. Since we integrate with all of the MFA solutions out there, the user doesn't have to install anything on his phone or on his desktop, and he's already using, let's say, his Okta for his fancy web applications. So now he's also using Okta as an example for everything else, his databases, his file shares, his RDP sessions, whatever it is. So there's no new training, there's no new onboarding, it's very seamless. Now, Since we see everything coming in, as I said earlier, we can apply that intelligence to all of those authentications, look at all the risk factors and provide the risk scoring. So implicitly, we can provide a lot more visibility into the authentication behavior of users. And I'll show you in the demo what that looks like. And also, obviously, there's nothing to deploy on the endpoints or on servers and so on, which means that this solution can be deployed in hours, not weeks or months. And that's really a key advantage because, systems administrators, they don't want another agent. They don't want to reconfigure systems to go through a new proxy. That's something that they've been or having to do for a long time. So that's something that we can actually be really fast at. And then I spoke already about the adaptive access, so that we can really look at the risk scoring and apply policy based on what's happening in the environment in terms of the authentication behavior. And so push out an MFA if we see something suspicious happening in the environment. And then last but not least, you don't need to do development for this solution. It's really an appliance, so there's no plugin that needs to be developed. There's no changes in any of the applications that you want to require MFA for. It's application agnostic. It really just looks at the authentications itself. All right, with that, I would pass on to the demonstration of the system. So what I've got here is, let me switch over to my workstation. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a standard Windows workstation, which has a file share that I can access to and a couple of other things. And then on the right-hand side, you see my phone. This is, I'm not sure if the video is still showing. So that's just a mirroring of my cell phone here. And you can see that, so I've got Microsoft Authenticator installed, and also got the Silverfort MFA installed. And this could be Okta, Ping, RSA, whatever you have, whatever is deployed in the environment. In the back end, obviously, we have the Silverfort infrastructure on the domain controller inside your AD, and there's 2 additional VMs that are part of our infrastructure, but that's really it. And this contains a couple of rules. For example, in the first case, we have a rule that says, well, when Jerome's identity connects to the file share which contains sensitive data, that needs to be MFA'd. So let me just do that. So what you can see here is that this file share that I'm opening is held, and I'm getting a push notification here on my phone, and I'm using the Silverfort app for this. Doesn't really matter which one it is. So let me just say no here. So that access is blocked, right? So on the left-hand side, this will give me an error message that the share is not accessible, as simple as that. Or after a certain time, this will obviously time out. Now in the opposite, we can also do the opposite case. Let me, for example, take an RDP session here that I'm trying to connect to, which also has a Silverfort rule. So again, I am getting the push notification. And in this case, I'm just going to say yes. I would allow this connection to happen, and I'm into the second machine. There's a lot more to this. We apply the same technology for privilege accounts. We apply the same technology for service accounts. So that is for webinar number 2 and webinar number 3, where we will go through different examples and look at how do we prevent lateral movement with this technology, and how do we protect service accounts, which is something that you can't MFA. So that's just a little bit of publicity for webinar number 2 and number 3. But let's move on in the demonstration here and have a look at the back end of the system. So this is our management console. And what you can see here is real authentications happening in real time in the environment that we're in right now. So all of the dots here, that's actually authentications happening right now. And they come from different sources. You can see here what's connected from different accounts. You see a little inventory here, and they go to a number of applications. And again, we're agnostic, so it doesn't really matter which applications they connect to, our policy will always apply. Now, sorry, the first thing that we do is we collect all that data, which obviously we can also give to a CM system if that's connected in your customer base. And from there, we deduct intelligence. So one is a simple inventory. You can go into the details of all of those. How many users do I have? How many of those are privileged accounts? And then a little bit more insights on that. How many users do I have that don't have expiring passwords? How many shadow admins do I have? All of those things we gather in real time, and we can apply intelligence to. Now we can go into more detail of that. As you can see down here, this is the risk scoring that we can apply to identities and to resources for that matter. So we can really look at, for example, this SF super admin. Why is he at critical risk right now? So this is the detailed page for this super admin. So the first thing we'll notice is that in the authentication behavior of that account, there's a peak. So there's something that happened here. Maybe that was a brute force attack because it's gotten roughly 700 authentications in a very short amount of time. So that is probably something we want to investigate a little more. Also, you see the entire authentication behavior here, and you see the risk indicators that we found for that particular account. So certainly brute force is one of the risk indicators that we've seen here. All of that without having an agent deployed, without the user even knowing that Silverfort exists, and without proxies or anything like that. So since we see all that, we obviously log everything. So if I refresh this, we will see that, for example, this is me doing the examples. So that's the logging that we have from all of the authentications that we, again, can pass on to any of the CM systems that customers might have, or you can use it in our console as well. And there's a lot more detail to that. And the nice thing about this logging is that from the logs, you can actually create policy for MFA or for blocking at the same time. I'm not going into the policy creation right now. That's something for the next webinar. However, just know that policy creation is something that's very simple, very straightforward. You don't need a whole bunch of policies. And the advantage is that we entirely work on your Active Directory infrastructure. So you can base your policy on users and groups in your Active Directory. And then you forget about the policies in Silverfort. You just manage the users and groups in your Active Directory, and our policy will apply to whatever is in those groups. So that's pretty straightforward as well. All right, with that, I would like to conclude the demonstration part, and I would like to open it up for Q&A. So let's look at our Q&A panel here. Jasper, have there been any questions so far?
Not that I see.
All right, yeah, no, wait here. One question that we got is, but what does it require then to be installed on the network?
Right, that's a good one. So the first thing, as we sit in the where authentications happen, there's a tiny component that needs to be installed on the domain controller to be able to see the authentications, to hold them and pass it on to our infrastructure. Our infrastructure contains 2 or 3 appliances. Most commonly, it's 2 appliances that can be deployed on-premise, and that are something we call a node that actually has the logic that will talk to the MFA provider, that will look at our policy and apply our policy. And then there's a second node that we call the admin, which is the console that I've just shown earlier. There's a third one that is optional, which we call the push, and that one is only needed in air-gapped environments. It's something that we haven't spoken about, but we can also operate in a fully air-gapped environment when there's no connectivity to the internet, so that we can push out MFA notifications to a desktop, for example, and for that you would need a push service. One thing that's also very important is that our platform, as is, can be deployed in an HA manner, so that it's highly available, but also should the entire Silverfort infrastructure fail to work, we can operate in a fail open mode, which means that even if everything breaks, people will still be able to log in. Any other questions?
None as far as I can see, unless this last answer now raised some more questions, so I'll leave it open for a little bit longer.
All right, so well, in the meantime, I would pass it on to Fritz again to round this up. And from my end, I would thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Jerome. Dank alle aanwezigen voor vandaag. Zoals Jerome al zei, er komen nog 2 webinars meer hierna voor deze webinarserie. Zorg dat je erbij bent. Weer wat nieuwe content met betrekking tot Silverfort. Ook Jerome en Jasper zullen er weer bij zijn. In ieder geval dank voor jullie komst tot nu toe. En mochten er nog vragen zijn, kunnen jullie altijd sturen naar de e-mailadressen die nu in het scherm staan. Of naar ons bij Exclusion Networks. En we zullen jullie natuurlijk van harte helpen. Bedankt alvast.